She had worked 3 double shifts to afford the dress, told herself she deserved it, and then sat alone in the most expensive restaurant in Vancouver for 2.5 hours while the man who'd called her, the most interesting woman he'd ever matched with, never walked through the door. But when the lights in Chateau Bel Air dimmed without warning, and the doors were sealed shut by men with earpieces and cold eyes, Willa Sutton realized that Owen Hart hadn't forgotten about their date. He'd used her to disappear. The reservation had been for 8 o'clock. By 8:45, Willa had stopped checking her phone every 3 minutes and started checking it every 7, which she told herself was progress. By 9:30, the waiter, a kind-faced young man named Dacio, who had refilled her sparkling water 4 times without being asked, had started looking at her with that particular brand of pity that Willa recognized instantly. She had a talent for recognizing it. She'd been collecting that look her whole life. She was wearing a dark burgundy wrap dress she'd ordered online after 45 minutes of reading reviews from other women who described themselves as curvy or full-figured, or, in one memorable case, aggressively real. She had read those reviews the way a person studies for an exam, cross-referencing measurements, zooming in on photos, reading the comments where women said things like it actually fits across the hips, and finally something that doesn't make me feel like a sausage casing. She had paid $340 for it, which was $340 more than she'd spent on a single item of clothing in 2 years. She'd told herself it was an investment. She'd skipped breakfast and eaten half a sandwich for lunch, so the waistband would sit right. She was a payroll coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company in downtown Vancouver. She was 31 years old. She had a good laugh and a very sharp memory for numbers, and a habit of making herself as invisible as possible in rooms where people were prettier or richer or thinner than her, which was most rooms. She had been on 11 dates in the past 2 years. Owen Hart would have been the 12th. They had matched on a premium dating app 6 weeks ago. He was 43 in his profile photos, dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had made a series of decisive choices, and he had messaged her first. Not a generic opener. He had referenced something specific from her profile, something about the audiobook she was listening to, and they had talked about it for 40 minutes before she'd realized she'd missed her bus stop. Over the following weeks, he had called her twice a week, always at 9 in the evening, always for at least an hour. He told her she was refreshing. He told her he found most people exhausting, but that talking to her felt like breathing. He said he had never understood men who weren't drawn to women with real substance, real presence. He said presence in a way that made her believe he meant it. He had insisted on Chateau Bel Air. He had made the reservation himself under his name and told her the maitre d' would be expecting her. He told her to wear something she felt magnificent in. She had believed him. By 10:15, the sparkling water had gone flat. The bread basket was empty, and Decio had stopped asking if she was ready to order. He just kept appearing silently at intervals, topping up her water with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some kindnesses were best performed without words. Willa pulled out her phone. 4 messages from her friend Daisy asking for updates. 0 from Owen. She opened his contact, stared at his name for a long moment, and then blocked him. She did it methodically, the way she did everything. Without drama, without ceremony, and then she set the phone face down on the white tablecloth and allowed herself exactly 45 seconds of sitting very still with her jaw tight and her eyes burning. It wasn't just the standing up. She had been stood up before. It was the architecture of it, the 6 weeks of calls, the careful attention, the way he had made her feel chosen rather than settled for. Someone had built all of that just to leave her sitting in a Michelin-starred restaurant in a $340 dress, with a flat sparkling water and a pitying waiter. She wanted to understand why, but mostly, she just wanted to leave before she cried in public. which she had decided at age 19 she would never do again. She reached for her handbag. The lights went out. Not all the way. The restaurant dropped to emergency lighting, a low amber glow that turned the cream tablecloths gold and made shadows out of every corner. The soft piano music that had been playing through invisible speakers cut off mid-phrase. The low hum of conversation across the room, the wealthy couples, the business dinners, the anniversary tables, stopped the way sound stops when a door closes, all at once and completely. Willa looked up. The maitre d', who had regarded her with barely concealed contempt when she arrived alone at 8 o'clock, was now standing, pressed against the far wall, with the color completely drained from his face. Near the entrance, 4 men had positioned themselves, with the casual precision of people who had done this before. They wore dark suits that fit too well and stood with their hands loose at their sides, in the particular way that meant the hands weren't actually loose at all. Then the 5th man walked in. He came through the main entrance without hurrying. He didn't need to hurry. He had the kind of presence that rearranged the air in a room, not loud, not theatrical, just absolute. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with black hair and a face that was all sharp angles and deliberate calm. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Willa's car. His eyes, when they swept the room, were a pale grey that registered everything and gave nothing back. Willa knew who he was. She suspected most people in Vancouver, with any awareness of the city's quieter power structures, knew who he was, even if they would never say his name out loud in polite company. Rafferty Crane. He ran the Crane Organization, which officially was a portfolio of real estate holdings and private logistics contracts, and a charitable foundation that put his name on a children's hospital wing. Unofficially, it was something much older and much darker, and the reason no federal investigation into his operations had ever produced an indictment was a question that journalists occasionally asked, and then quietly stopped asking. One of his men stepped forward and addressed the room in the tone of someone reading a weather report. Chateau Bel Air is closed for the remainder of the evening. Please leave your meals. Please exit through the service corridor at the rear of the kitchen. Take your personal belongings. Do not linger. What happened next was something Willa would think about for a long time afterward. Not the fear of it, but the efficiency. 40 people in evening wear moved toward the kitchen exit with the coordinated urgency of a fire drill. Nobody argued. Nobody demanded to speak to a manager. A woman in a floor-length gown left a full glass of Bordeaux untouched. A man in a bespoke suit walked away from what looked like a dry-aged ribeye without a backward glance. The collective wealth and social standing in that room evaporated the instant Rafferty Crane walked through the door, and everyone moved in the same direction without being told twice. Willa did not move. She couldn't explain it entirely. Part of it was the paralysis of genuine fear, the kind that bypasses the rational mind and goes straight to the muscles. But part of it, and she would be honest with herself about this later, was something stupider. She was so angry that she had temporarily lost the ability to be afraid. The room emptied in under 2 minutes. The kitchen staff had retreated to the far corner. Willa sat at her corner table in her burgundy wrap dress and did not move. Rafferty Crane crossed the restaurant. He walked between the empty tables without looking at them, moving straight toward the back corner, where a single woman sat alone with a flat, sparkling water and an empty bread basket, and he stopped at her table. Up close, he was more overwhelming than photographs suggested. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older, the kind of man whose age was less a number than a quality, something accrued through a particular kind of life. He smelled of cedar, and something cold, something precise, and he looked down at her with pale grey eyes that were doing rapid, thorough work. He looked at the empty chair across from her. He looked at the single-place setting. He looked at the flat water and the crumpled napkin and the tiny signs of 2.5 hours of waiting that Willa had tried and failed to entirely conceal. Then Rafferty Crane pulled out the empty chair and sat down in it. "You're the bookkeeper," he said. His voice was low and even. It was the voice of a man who did not raise it. Willa stared at him. Her brain performed an emergency reorganization. "I'm sorry, what?" "Owen Harty's bookkeeper." He said it again, not louder, just slower. "The way you repeat something to someone who is concussed. He told my associates you would be here. He said you were his partner, that you would be carrying the account transfers." The name landed like something dropped from a height. Owen. Willa heard herself say, "You know Owen Hart?" Rafferty tilted his head. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite amusement. It was more clinical than that. He reached out and straightened the fork that lay across the empty place setting, a small, unconscious movement that somehow made him more unsettling. "I employed Owen Hart," he said. "He managed the financial reconciliation for 3 of my subsidiary holdings, past tense, as of 48 hours ago, when I discovered that approximately $2.8 million had been redirected through a series of accounts he controlled." Willa felt the room rearrange itself. She was a payroll coordinator for a logistics company. She processed expense reports and ran payroll cycles and occasionally stayed late to fix other people's spreadsheet errors. She had met Owen Hart on a dating app and spent 6 weeks talking to him on the phone about audiobooks and city planning and the relative merits of different types of ramen. And now she was sitting across from the most dangerous man in Vancouver who believed she was a criminal. "He told my people he was meeting his partner tonight," Rafferty continued. His eyes hadn't moved from her face. They were cataloguing things, the quality of her fear, the set of her jaw, the way she was gripping the edge of the table. "He said you had the transfer documentation. He said, if we allowed him to come here tonight, he would have the account access credentials within the hour." He paused. "And yet here we are." The full picture assembled itself in Willa's mind with a speed that surprised her. Owen hadn't been nervous about their date. He hadn't even thought about their date. He had made a reservation at the most visible, most high-profile restaurant he could access, staged an elaborate blind date, complete with a real woman who would genuinely be sitting there waiting, and then he had walked out of the city while Rafferty Crane's people converged on Chateau Belair, looking for a partner who didn't exist. She had been the distraction. She had sat here for 2.5 hours, eating bread and being pitied by a waiter and quietly falling apart, and the entire time she had been performing a function she didn't know she'd been assigned. The fear that had been sitting in her chest since the lights went out burned away completely. What replaced it was something white and very clean. "That absolute," Willa said, and her voice came out very quiet and very steady. "Spineless, calculating son of a bitch." Rafferty Crane blinked. It was a small movement, but she had the impression it was not a movement he made often. Willa set both hands flat on the table. She was aware that there were men with weapons standing behind her. She was aware that she was alone in a closed restaurant with organized criminals. She was also so thoroughly, incandescently furious that these facts had been temporarily demoted in her internal priority ranking. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks of phone calls. He knew I worked in finance. That's why he chose me, isn't it? He knew it would be plausible. He knew I would actually show up and sit here and wait like an idiot, because I was raised to be polite and patient, and to give people the benefit of the doubt. She heard her voice crack slightly on the last word, and hated herself for it. "Do you know what I did today? I skipped lunch. I did my hair. I paid $340 for this dress, because he told me to wear something I felt magnificent in, and I wanted to believe him, and apparently what that makes me is a prop in someone else's con." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Behind Rafferty, one of his men, a broad-shouldered figure with a scar along his jaw, leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Rafferty didn't look at him. "He picked you because you were credible," Rafferty said after a moment. His voice had shifted in a way she couldn't quite name. A real woman. A real reservation. A real evening with real waiting. My people would watch the restaurant, see a woman genuinely sitting alone, conclude that the situation was real, and give him time to move. He paused. It was well constructed. Wonderful, Willa said flatly. Please put that on my tombstone. Something moved in Rafferty Crane's face. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was the ghost of one, maybe. The place where a smile would be on a man who had stopped making them for reasons he didn't discuss. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her wallet, extracting her employee ID card and dropping it on the table between them. Willa Sutton. Payroll Coordinator, Pacific Crest Logistics. I have worked there for 4 years. I process bi-weekly payroll for 237 employees. And I reconcile expense accounts. And I definitely do not have $2.8 million, or whatever documentation you're looking for. And if you're going to have me killed, I'd appreciate knowing so I can call my mother first. Rafferty picked up the ID card. He looked at it. He looked at her. She watched him the way she watched spreadsheets when something wasn't adding up. Methodically, without flinching, waiting for the error to reveal itself. You said he called you, Rafferty said finally. 6 weeks of calls. Yes. What did he talk about? Willa thought. Books, city planning, food. He had opinions about sourdough that I found exhausting in retrospect. He talked about his job. He said he was in financial consulting, private, clients, high net worth individuals. She paused. He was very careful never to be specific. I noticed that, but I told myself it was privacy, not deception. She pressed her lips together. I work with numbers for a living. I should have run the math. Rafferty set the ID card down and sat back. He was looking at her differently now. The catalogue quality had shifted into something harder to read. Dex, he said, without turning. The scarred man stepped forward. She's not the partner, boss. Wrong profile. Wrong background. Hart played us. Yes, Rafferty said. He played everyone in this room. He looked at the ID card on the table for another moment. Run a verification anyway. Dex nodded and stepped back. Willa sat very still. The anger that had carried her through the last several minutes was ebbing now. And underneath it was something colder and more realistic. She was in a sealed restaurant with organized criminals. The rational part of her brain, which had been standing politely to one side while the furious part ran the floor, was now requesting to be heard. What happens now? She asked. She aimed for matter of fact and landed close enough. Rafferty looked at her. That depends partly on what Owen Hart sent to your phone. Willa frowned. He didn't send anything to my phone. Are you certain? She picked up her phone. She had blocked Owen's number, but the messages were still visible. She scrolled back through their thread, mostly conversation, scheduling, the occasional photo of a coffee he thought was exceptional. And then, 3 days ago, a link. She had glanced at it at the time, assumed it was an article he'd mentioned wanting to share, and hadn't clicked it because she'd been in a meeting. She showed the screen to Rafferty without comment. He didn't touch the phone. He just looked at the link, and something shifted in his face. A precise, contained fury that was much more frightening than shouting would have been. He sent it to your phone because he knew we'd be watching his, Rafferty said quietly. He turned to Dex. Get Mariana up here. While they waited, Willa sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the link on her screen and felt sick in a specific way. Not frightened exactly, but violated. She had been carrying this for 3 days without knowing. She had sat in meetings and eaten lunch and ridden the bus home, and the entire time she had been a vessel for something that didn't belong to her, that had been placed there without her knowledge or consent, by a man who had spent 6 weeks making her feel seen so that she would be useful. She thought about the $340 dress. She thought about the skipped lunch. She thought about the 45 minutes she'd spent reading reviews from other women who just wanted something that fit. A woman arrived within 4 minutes, mid-30s, with close-cropped natural hair and the focused expression of someone who thought in code. She looked at the phone, looked at Willa, looked at Rafferty. "Give her 10 minutes, Rafferty said. Mariana sat across from Willa, which meant Rafferty had to relocate to the adjacent table. He did so without comment, settling into a chair angled toward them, one arm resting on the back of it, watching. "I'm going to need you to confirm the biometric," Mariana said, sliding the phone back toward Willa. "Just unlock it normally." Willa unlocked her phone and handed it back. She watched Mariana work and thought about the fact that she had excellent spatial memory, and she had just watched which combination of screens Mariana navigated to, which she filed away in the part of her mind that collected information reflexively and without permission. It took 11 minutes, not 10. "It's all here," Mariana said, looking at Rafferty. "Full account architecture. Shell registrations, routing sequences, offshore signatory access. Everything we've been missing since Tuesday." A pause. He packaged it as a compressed file disguised as a news article. If she'd clicked it on her home network, it would have automatically forwarded to a Gallagher proxy server. Willa turned the name over in her mind. Gallagher. She had heard that name in connection with certain organized crime stories that occasionally surfaced in Vancouver news before promptly disappearing. A competing organization. A rival. Owen Hart had stolen from the Crane organization, packaged the evidence on her phone, and arranged for it to be automatically forwarded to their enemies the moment Willa sat down at home and opened what she thought was a news article her date had shared. He had built her into the delivery system. "He didn't just use me as cover," Willa said. She heard her own voice come out flat and strange. "He was going to use my home internet address. My name would have been in the metadata, if anything ever came back on it." "Yes," Rafferty said. He was looking at her steadily. "You would have been the point of origin." The silence lasted several seconds. "I want to be clear about something," Willa said carefully. "I have cooperated with everything you've asked. I've given you my ID, I've unlocked my phone, I've told you everything I know about Owen Hart, which is apparently significantly less than I believed. I would now like to go home." Rafferty was quiet for a moment. "Dex," he said. "Gallagher already knows the handoff didn't complete," Dex said from behind her. His voice was not unkind. "They'll be running the source. They know it came from a phone registered to a Willa Sutton of East Vancouver. They don't know she's not Hart's partner. They'll assume she is." Willa processed this. "So what you're saying," she said slowly, "is that Owen Hart has made me a target with both of you. He's made you a target with my rivals," Rafferty said. "Not with me. That's a distinction I appreciate but don't entirely trust." "That's sensible," he said. He stood. She tracked the motion, the unhurried way he moved, the way the room organized itself around him without his asking. He walked toward her and she held very still, which was not nothing, and he stopped beside her chair and looked down at her with those pale grey eyes that had been running calculations on her since he sat down. "You have 2 options," Rafferty said. "You go home tonight. The Gallagher organization has your name, your address, and the working assumption that you're Hart's inside person. You'll have somewhere between 6 hours and 3 days before that becomes a problem." He paused. "Or you come with me. You're under my protection until Hart is located, and this is resolved. No one touches you. No one looks at you sideways. I give you my word." "I don't know what your word is worth," Willa said. "No," he agreed. "You don't, yet." She looked at him. She thought about Owen Hart, who had spent 6 weeks building her trust with the precision of someone who knew exactly how trust worked and exactly how to weaponize it. She thought about her apartment in East Vancouver and the 3 locks on her door that had never needed to mean anything before tonight. She thought about the fact that Rafferty Crane had not threatened her once. He had been honest about the situation, had not minimized it, had not told her everything was fine. He had told her the truth and given her a choice, which was more than Owen Hart had done in 6 weeks. "Okay," she said. He offered her his hand to help her stand. She looked at it for a half-second, then took it. His grip was very steady and very warm, and he didn't let go until she was on her feet, and even then there was a half-moment of contact at the tips of her fingers before he stepped back. "Dex," he said, "bring the car." The ride to the Crane residence was 40 minutes through rain-slicked Vancouver streets. Willa sat in the back of a black SUV that smelled of leather and something like cedar, watching the city slide past through tinted glass. Rafferty sat beside her. He didn't fill the silence, which she noted and filed away as information. They crossed the Lions Gate Bridge and climbed into West Vancouver, turning eventually through a gate, set into a stone wall that appeared suddenly out of a stand of Douglas firs. The house beyond it was not what she expected. She had anticipated something aggressive, glass towers and aggressive lighting, and the architecture of conspicuous power. What she found instead was a large timber frame house built into the hillside, old growth and slate, and a wide deck overlooking the water, all of it dark and quiet and almost entirely without ego. She was given a room that felt like someone had actually thought about what a person would need. Good light, good bedding, a window with a view of the inlet. She sat on the edge of the bed in her burgundy wrap dress and her good shoes and her carefully applied makeup that had survived the evening better than she had, and she breathed. At some point, Dex brought her tea, which she hadn't asked for, and set it on the dresser without comment, and she thought that was one of the kinder things anyone had done for her in recent memory. Rafferty came to the door of the room, not in it, at the threshold which she noted, and told her that Mariana had already secured the account architecture, that the Gallagher organization's access had been revoked, and that Owen Hart had been traced to a motel in Kelowna. "What happens to him?" she asked. Rafferty looked at her with the pale grey eyes that gave nothing back. "That depends on what he does in the next 12 hours. Does it depend at all on what I want?" A pause. Something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, but attending. "Tell me what you want." She thought about it. She thought about the phone calls and the audiobooks, and the way he had said the word presence. She thought about the $300 for $40 dress and the empty bread basket and Decio the waiter, who had been kind to her in the particular way of someone who understands that some kindnesses are best performed without words. "I want him to know that it didn't work," she said. "That whatever he thought he was building, the story where I'm the pathetic lonely woman who carries his secrets home on her phone and never even notices, I want him to know it didn't go the way he planned." Rafferty nodded slowly. "That I can arrange." At 2 a.m, her phone rang. The number was blocked. She looked at Rafferty, who was standing in the doorway of the sitting room with a cup of coffee and a look that said, "Your call." She answered, "Willa." Owen's voice came through the speaker, tight and strange. All the warm baritone that had made her miss bus stops stripped away to something raw and scared. "Willa, thank God. Are you okay? Where are you?" She didn't say anything for a moment. She let him sit in the silence. "I'm fine, Owen," she said finally. Her voice was very calm. "I'm actually having a surprisingly productive evening, all things considered. Listen to me." The pleasantness was gone now, the layer of careful charm that had made him feel like a person. What was underneath it was much simpler and much uglier. "I need you to do something for me. The file I sent you. I need you to forward it to an address I'm going to give you. Right now. Tonight." "The file you hid on my phone," Willa said, "without telling me, while I was sitting in that restaurant waiting for you." A pause, a recalibration. It was necessary. "It's complicated, Willa. You don't understand what's involved." "I understand exactly what's involved," she said. "Mariana walked me through the whole architecture about 3 hours ago. It's actually elegant, in a horrible sort of way. You even thought about the metadata." She paused. "I work with numbers, Owen. I told you that on our second call. You used it against me and you also underestimated me, which is a fairly common combination in my experience." "Willa, His voice had changed again, harder now, dropping the pretense. You're going to forward that file. The people who are coming for you. You don't know what they're capable of. You give them what they want. And this goes away. The file has been decrypted and secured, and the accounts have already been revoked, Willa said pleasantly. So there's nothing to forward. And the people you're worried about coming for me, one of them is standing in the doorway across the room right now. He's drinking coffee. He looks like he's had a fairly long day, but he doesn't seem particularly worried. Silence. Willa, you called me a prop, she said. The pleasantness left her voice. Not to my face, because you never talk to me face to face, but that's what you built this whole thing on. The idea that I was somebody you could move around and put places and nobody would question, because who looks twice at the woman sitting alone at the table in the corner? She breathed. I have spent a significant portion of my life trying to take up less space. That's on me. But you looked at that and saw a tool, and I want you to know that didn't work out the way you expected. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Owen said, softly, viciously, You think he's protecting you? You're just useful to him too, Willa. You're always just. Rafferty crossed the room, reached out, and ended the call. She looked at the phone. She breathed. He's not entirely wrong, she said, because she had decided in the last several hours to be honest with herself as a policy. He's entirely wrong, Rafferty said. His voice was quiet. He was standing close, not crowding her, but present in a way she was becoming accustomed to. You were useful to him because you were invisible to him. Those are not the same thing. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the pale grey eyes that had been cataloguing her all evening, and what she saw in them now was something different. Not calculation, but attention. The specific attention of someone who has looked at something for a long time and stopped being objective about it. I'm a payroll coordinator from East Vancouver, she said. I'm a practical person. I'd like to know what this is. Complicated, he said. A pause. And not temporary. You don't know me. I know more than you think, he said. I've been watching you manage an extremely unusual evening. I've watched you angry and frightened and betrayed and calculating, and I haven't seen you perform once. He stopped. He seemed to choose his next words carefully in the way of someone who doesn't often choose carefully. Most people I meet are performing. She thought about that. She thought about the burgundy dress and the skipped lunch and the 45 minutes of reading reviews. She thought about all the years of trying to be less visible, less present, less there, and how none of it had made her any smaller, just quieter. The dress cost $340, she said. I know, he said. It's a remarkable dress. She looked at him for a long moment. She was a person who paid attention to numbers and to details and to the small signals that most people transmitted without knowing they were doing it. She had been paying attention to Rafferty Crane for the last 5 hours, and what she was reading was not performance. She had spent 6 weeks being fooled by something that looked like attention and was actually calculation. She knew what the fake version felt like now. This felt different. Okay, she said. 3 weeks later, Owen Hart was located in a motel outside of Kelowna and brought back to Vancouver in the kind of quiet, efficient way that left no paperwork. He had, it emerged, also been running a parallel scheme with the Gallagher organization, playing both sides, which was the kind of ambitious stupidity that tended to resolve itself poorly. Willa was not present for that resolution. She was at the kitchen table in the West Vancouver house, with a laptop and a strong coffee and a set of financial records that Rafferty's people had been misreading for 6 months, and she was fixing them with the patient, methodical pleasure of someone doing exactly what she was built for. Mariana was across the table from her, initially skeptical, and then, after the first 40 minutes, very much not skeptical, asking questions with the focused interest of someone recalibrating their assumptions. Rafferty came in at some point and set a plate of toast beside her, without interrupting what she was saying, and she ate it without looking up, and she heard him laugh from across the kitchen at something, Dex said. A real laugh. Low and slightly startled sounding, and she filed it away in the part of her mind that collected important things. Later, she would think about all the small choices that had led to a Tuesday night in a closed restaurant in a burgundy dress. All the compromises she had made about space, about visibility, about making herself easier for other people to overlook. She would think about the waiter named Decio, who had kept her glass full without being asked, and the maitre, who had sneered at her when she walked in alone, and the 40 wealthy people who had abandoned their meals and their wine in under 2 minutes, the moment a real kind of power walked through the door. She would think about Owen Hart, who had looked at her and seen nothing but a useful silence. She would think about Rafferty Crane, who had looked at her and seen something else entirely. "You're not a prop," he told her much later, when the city lights were reflecting off the inlet and the house was quiet around them. He said it the way he said most things, without flourish, without performance, as plain fact. His hand was warm at the curve of her waist. "You never were. I know that now," Willa said, and she did.